Welcome back to the deep dive. This is the place where we take on these just massive, often overwhelming clouds of information that surround the most powerful people on the planet.
But we try to boil it all down.
Exactly. We distill it, looking for the essential strategic lessons and, honestly, some of the most surprising facts you'll find.
And today we are really peering into the foundational blueprint of a modern titan, Jeffrey Preston Bezos.
It's a huge topic. I mean, where do you even start?
It really is a deep dive that spans, well, the entire spectrum of modern influence. When you start to pull together all the sources on his trajectory, you realize Bezos didn't just build a store.
No, not at all.
He built the core infrastructure of modern digital commerce with Amazon. Then he built the spine of the internet itself, which is AWS.
Which most people don't even realize is an Amazon company.
Right. And then you have him aiming to colonize space with Blue Origin, and of course he owns one of the world's most critical media outlets, the Washington Post.
His influence, like you said, it's inescapable. So our mission today is to move way beyond that surface level image.
You mean the fit corporate titan persona?
Yeah, exactly that. We want to understand the meticulous and, you could say, often ruthless decision-making framework that let him pivot from Wall Street to a garage.
And survive. Don't forget, he survived near financial ruin.
A huge part of the story. And then dedicate this massive capital to solving these grand, almost existential problems like aging and climate change.
We're looking for the pattern, really.
Mm-hmm.
We need to track how an early, almost mathematical tool he developed, the regret-minimization framework, guided him.
And how that framework led him to controlling all this critical infrastructure.
Everything, from the informational flow we consume every day to the underlying cloud systems that, basically run your daily life.
Okay, let's unpack this. Where did the journey begin?
Well, to really understand the builder, I think you have to look at the blueprint of his early life. He was born Jeffrey Preston Jorgensen, January 12, 1964, in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And the sources right away point to a pretty, an atypical family structure.
Atypical is a good word for it. His mother, Jacqueline, was quite young.
Extremely young. She was only 17. His biological father, Ted Jorgensen, was 19. And get this, he was working as a Danish-American unicyclist.
A unicyclist. Every time I read that detail, it just stands out. It's such a specific, almost bizarre note in the early story as someone who would become this rigid, quantitative business mind.
It really underscores the initial instability, doesn't it?
For sure.
His parents divorced when he was only 17 months old.
Yeah.
So that stability, it came much later. It came when his mother married Miguel Mike Bezos.
A Cuban immigrant.
Right, in 1968.
Yeah.
And Mike legally adopted Jeff when he was 4, which is where the name change to Bezos comes from. The family then moved to Houston.
And that's where things start to ground themselves a bit more.
Exactly. Mike was an engineer for Exxon, and that provided a much more focused, technically oriented environment for young Jeff.
And we also find evidence of that technical heritage on his maternal side, too, right?
Oh, absolutely crucial context. His maternal grandfather, Lawrence Preston Keyes, was a regional director of the U.S. Atomic Energy Commission.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, that's a highly technical, strategically critical Cold War field. Bezos spent summers on his grandfather's ranch in Texas, and he was learning practical skills, but he was also being exposed to these rigorous scientific ways of thinking.
And you can see the practical application of that rigor right from his childhood. The sources mention the pretty wild technical lengths he went to just to secure his own personal space.
Yes, that famous anecdote. He rigged up an electrical alarm system.
Just with basic tools.
Just with basic tools to keep his younger half-siblings out of his room. It's a perfect microcosm of his future approach, isn't it?
Completely. Building a system, usually a technological one, to establish and maintain boundaries and, control.
That desire to systematize and automate solutions was there from the very beginning, even before high school.
And speaking of school, he wasn't just, bookish. The sources detail he went to a Montessori school at age 2.
Which is all about self-directed learning.
Right. But he also had real practical work experience. He was a short-order line cook at McDonald's during high school in Miami. He was both a National Merit Scholar and, a hands-on worker.
But his time at Princeton, where he arrived in 1982, that really shows a major internal conflict. He initially majored in theoretical physics.
Which is about as ambitious and competitive as you can get, intellectually.
It's the peak. And he was good at it. But then he abandoned it. He switched to electrical engineering and computer science.
That's a huge pivot for someone aiming that high. Why?
Well, it was more than just a pivot. It was an act of brutal, pragmatic self-assessment. Bezos later said that he just hit a wall. He failed to solve a particularly difficult mathematical problem.
And that was it. That was the moment.
That was the moment. He realized that while he was good, he wasn't. He wasn't destined to be a truly great theoretical physicist. So he decided to shift all that immense energy to a field where he knew he could actually maximize his impact.
That willingness to accept intellectual defeat so quickly and then re-optimize his energy, that seems like a foundational element of his entire business genius.
It's the ultimate expression of that quantitative mind. He didn't waste years chasing a theoretical peak he knew deep down he couldn't reach.
So he graduates summa cum laude in 1986. But even then, before the business world, the seeds of his real long-term obsession were already visible.
You're talking about his 1982 high school graduation speech.
Exactly.
Even as a teenager, he laid out his future dream that mankind should eventually colonize space.
With the ultimate goal of transforming Earth into a, quote, huge national park.
By relocating all the heavy industry off-world. This wasn't just some passing thought for him. It became the guiding, almost spiritual ideology of his life's work at Blue Origin.
So he's got this Princeton degree, this passion for engineering, and then he hits Wall Street, which feels like the laboratory where he forged the philosophical tool that would define his entire career.
He took the traditional track to success at first. He bypassed giants like Intel for the high-growth fintech world at a place called FeeTel, then Bankers Trust. But his most formative experience was at D. Shaw & Co.
A mathematical modeling hedge fund.
Right. And he rose incredibly fast. He was the firm's fourth senior vice president by the time he was 30. He was on the fast track to enormous stable wealth.
And it was right there, looking at the burgeoning internet in 1994, that he had to reconcile this massive immediate success with what he saw as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity.
This brings us to the regret-minimization framework.
Explain that. It sounds so Bezos.
It's fascinating because it completely turns traditional risk assessment on its head. Most people, we fear immediate failure, career-ending mistakes.
Yeah.
Bezos used this framework to prioritize avoiding long-term spiritual regret. He imagined himself at age 80, looking back on his life, and he asked a simple question.
Am I going to regret leaving Wall Street?
The answer was no. Then he asked, will I regret missing the beginning of the internet? And the answer was a resounding yes.
So it completely reframes what risk is. The most dangerous path wasn't starting a risky company from scratch.
No. The most dangerous path was choosing stasis, choosing comfort over this massive generational wave that was the internet.
That's the key takeaway right there. It gave him the push he needed to quit everything, move cross-country, and basically trade guaranteed millions for a 70% chance of immediate failure.
He realized that a static, safe career on Wall Street carried a higher risk of long-term irrelevance than the high risk of immediate business failure. And that philosophy, that fight against stasis, it feeds directly into his later day-one management principle at Amazon.
The actual moment of inception for Amazon,
Yeah.
it sounds almost like a myth now. What was the specific catalyst that made him pull the trigger on that framework?
It was a single, staggering data point he saw in the spring of 1994. He read that web usage was growing at an unprecedented rate of 2,300% a year.
2,300%.
For his mathematically trained mind, that wasn't just growth. It was an exponential explosion that demanded immediate, drastic action.
And he didn't hesitate for a second. He and his then-wife, Mackenzie Scott, they literally wrote the business plan on a cross-country drive.
From New York to Seattle, they founded the company in a rented garage in Bellevue, Washington, on July 5, 1994.
And it wasn't even called Amazon at first.
No, the initial name was Cadabra, but that changed very quickly to Amazon.
Why the change?
It was strategic in two ways, according to the documents. First, the A was crucial for getting a high placement in the alphabetical online search listings, which were common back then.
A very practical reason.
Very. And second, the Amazon River was the world's largest. That perfectly fit his ambition to create the world's largest bookstore, and then eventually the world's largest everything store.
The initial funding was pretty humble by today's standards, about $300,000 from his parents.
But even then, he warned those early investors of that now famous 70% chance of failure. It was just brutal honesty about the frontier they were entering.
And we really can't overlook Mackenzie Scott's role in this origin story.
No, the sources really emphasize she was integral to the whole thing. She handled foundational operational tasks, like keeping the books, writing the initial checks, and critically negotiating Amazon's very first freight contracts.
So she was establishing the logistics backbone from day one.
From day one, Amazon had its IPO in 1997, just 3 years after founding, and it immediately started to diversify. By 1998, they were already moving beyond books into music, video, and other consumer goods.
Which was incredibly aggressive growth, funded by that IPO equity.
That aggression was so characteristic of the dot-com era. Amazon was just snapping up stakes in early e-commerce ventures.
Many of which were completely doomed.
Oh yeah, like Pets.com and Cosmo.com. Both failed spectacularly in 2000. And that aggressive spending ran straight into the crisis.
Right. So before he built the back end of the internet, he almost broke the front end of his own company. How close did Amazon really come to extinction during the dot-com bubble collapse?
Far closer than I think most people realize. By the end of 2000, Amazon was borrowing $2 billion just to stay afloat.
Wow.
And its cash balances had dipped to a terrifying $350 million. They were on the brink of bankruptcy. It forced a painful, pragmatic reevaluation of the entire business model.
What were the specific actions he took to survive when so many other dot-coms just vanished?
He took decisive, brutal cost-cutting action. He closed distribution centers, laid off 14% of the workforce. The rebound wasn't just driven by more sales.
It was about efficiency.
Relentless operational focus, tightening supply chains, demanding internal efficiency. And this focus paid off. Amazon achieved its first significant profit, $35 million, in 2003. That was a massive psychological and financial turning point.
But the real game changer, the strategic shift that cemented Amazon's future, wasn't about moving boxes more efficiently. It was about infrastructure. It was the birth of Amazon Web Services, AWS.
What's so fascinating here is that AWS, which they launched in 2002, wasn't initially envisioned as this massive external business. It was actually born from a realization that Amazon had become world-class at managing huge, reliable server capacity internally.
For their own e-commerce needs.
Exactly. They were just managing the incredible complexity of e-commerce, logistics, all these data streams.
So they were essentially too good at their own internal systems management.
That's a great way to put it. Amazon had built this incredibly efficient, scalable platform to run its retail operation, but a lot of that platform capacity often just sat unused.
Right, outside of peak shopping season.
The strategic genius was realizing that their internal inefficiency, this massive, unused, fixed computing capacity, could be productized. They could sell it as a flexible, variable utility to anyone else starting an internet company.
So they turned a colossal internal cost center into the company's highest margin, most stable revenue stream.
That is the move that changed everything. And that strategic shift led to enormous returns, culminating in these high-value government contracts.
Like the $600 million cloud contract with the CIA in 2013.
Which solidified AWS's role as critical strategic infrastructure for the U.S. government. This infrastructure focus then allowed Amazon to just dominate retail, securing its place as the world's largest online shopping retailer by 2013.
And you see that relentless focus on user experience in other products too, like the Kindle.
For sure. The Amazon Kindle, launched in 2007, was all about trying to create a flow state in reading, making the technology disappear so you're just immersed in the book.
Okay, so let's fast forward to the present. We see Bezos transitioning away from the day-to-day operations. July 2021, he steps down as CEO.
He becomes executive chairman, handing the operational reins to Andy Jassy.
And the reason for that transition?
It was explicitly motivated by his desire to dedicate his time and energy to those massive long-term passions we talked about. The Day One Fund, the Bezos Earth Fund, Blue Origin, and of course the Washington Post.
But the sources suggest he's hardly retired. He made a massive public statement in December 2024 about his new internal focus.
That's the key signal right there. He stated publicly that he was now dedicating 95% of his time to artificial intelligence initiatives at Amazon.
95%.
This move shows he's shifting his full attention to the next fundamental technological frontier. He wants to ensure Amazon remains at the absolute forefront of AI dominance.
And to facilitate this shift, he's been executing a substantial stock sale.
A massive one. In February 2024, he sold 24 million shares for $4 billion, with plans to sell a total of 50 million shares over the next year. This massive liquidity event frees up capital precisely when his external ventures, especially Blue Origin, require staggering amounts of investment.
Blue Origin often gets lumped in with, space tourism, but the sources show it's so much more profound for Bezos. This is the culmination of that high school vision.
It absolutely is. He founded the human spaceflight startup way back in September 2000. This is the consistent, decades-long driving ideology of his life.
It all goes back to that 1982 speech.
It frames the entire goal to use space colonization, building hotels, amusement parks, colonies in orbit to preserve Earth's finite resources.
So the long-term goal is deeply environmental in a way.
It is. The primary mission isn't tourism. It's to increase the safety and, most importantly, to radically reduce the cost structure of getting to space.
Because he believes that by moving heavy polluting industries off-world,
We can decrease business-related pollution on Earth and fulfill that early vision of turning our planet into a massive nature preserve.
for years, Blue Origin was characterized by just extreme secrecy.
It maintained an almost clandestine low profile until 2006, when it bought that huge launch and test facility tract in West Texas. But, the path into space is notoriously difficult, even for a billionaire.
And in 2011, they faced a very visible, very difficult setback.
That's right. An uncrewed prototype vehicle crashed during a short-hop test flight. And that failure led directly to a fascinating personal quirk that perfectly encapsulates the dichotomy of Jeff Bezos.
I think I know where you're going with this. The world's most data-driven executive, the man who requires 6-page narrative memos for meetings.
Relies on lucky cowboy boots.
It's such a fundamental disconnect between his image and his actions.
It's the human element in the risk model, right?
Yeah.
Since that crash, he has superstitiously worn his lucky Texas cowboy boots to every single rocket launch. It shows that even the most quantitative mind needs some ritual in the face of immense, unforgiving engineering risk.
The big technical breakthrough finally came in 2015 with the New Shepard vehicle.
And that breakthrough was huge, because New Shepard successfully reached space, and crucially, it executed a vertical landing back on Earth,
Which proved the fundamental concept of reusability.
which is essential to radically reducing the cost of access to space. By 2017, they were flying dummy passengers, pushing the start date for human space travel closer and closer.
And as the expenses mounted, the mechanism for funding this life's work became very clear in 2016.
He established a dedicated pipeline, selling $1 billion in Amazon stock each year to capitalize Blue Origin.
$1 billion a year.
That kind of consistent, massive personal divestment just underscores that this is not a hobby for him. This is a self-funded national space program.
The ultimate high point, though, had to be his own personal trip to space.
Oh, for sure. On July 20, 2021, Bezos flew into suborbital space on the NS-16 mission. He was joined by his half-brother Mark, the aviation pioneer Wally Funk, and Oliver Damon.
And it was just 9 days after his competitor Richard Branson went up.
The flight lasted just over 10 minutes, reached 66.5 miles, and it confirmed his status as a commercial astronaut.
And the commercial reality of this venture is already taking shape, with ticket prices now firmly established.
Yeah, the sources indicate that back in July 2018, the commercial spaceflight tickets were priced between $200,000 and $300,000 per person.
So the revenue stream is starting.
It's starting. But while that revenue is important, the overarching goal remains the same: the preservation of Earth's natural resources by making the human species multi-planetary. It's about a future where interspace energy and industrial manufacturing decrease pollution here on Earth.
Okay, so beyond the Amazon retail monster and Blue Origin's existential quest, Bezos's personal investments give us a real window into his strategic mind.
Right, and these are managed through his venture capital firm, Bezos Expeditions. It's focused on spotting the next tectonic shift.
And the most legendary example of that early foresight has to be the Google investment.
Oh, absolutely. In 1998, he put a very modest $250,000 into the nascent search engine.
$250,000.
By 2017, that initial investment was worth approximately $3.1 billion.
Wow.
It was 3.3 million shares. That kind of return. It doesn't happen without a profound grasp of future market scale.
But his portfolio also reveals this deep, almost obsessive focus on life sciences and healthcare. He's specifically trying to defy biological limits.
Yes, there's significant activity in healthcare, and it's all targeting fundamental disruption. Investments in longevity firms like Unity Biotechnology, along with Drail, Judo Therapeutics, ZocDoc.
And he was instrumental in the Haven project.
Right, in 2018, that partnership with JP Morgan and Berkshire Hathaway, it was aimed squarely at disrupting the American healthcare system. It just shows an enduring interest in systemic change across foundational industries.
And his passion for space history weaves into his investments too, which is fascinating.
Expeditions funded the spectacular recovery of 2 Saturn VF-1 engines from the Apollo 11 mission.
From the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean.
In 2013, these engines, these massive physical artifacts of the original space race, are now on display at the Seattle Museum of Flight. It's a very personal link between his current space efforts and that historical American ambition.
All right, let's pivot to the Washington Post. He bought the paper in 2013 for $250 million in cash.
And the initial goal, as you mentioned, was to reinvent a struggling print institution using his expertise in technology and analytics.
And for a while, that technological intervention seemed to work.
It did. He shifted the focus to digital analytics, subscriptions, and the Post actually achieved profitability in 2016 for the first time since he bought it. It was framed as a business turnaround, modernizing news delivery.
However, this ownership became a massive point of public scrutiny and controversy, particularly in 2024 and 2025. It suggests the goal shifted from maximizing profit to, well, maximizing influence.
The trouble started earlier with employee disputes. In 2018, you had over 400 staffers publicly criticizing what they called shocking poor wages and benefits.
Followed by a strike.
A brief strike over layoff plans in December 2023. But the real firestorm was the editorial interference.
And the major incident was his direct intervention concerning the 2024 presidential election.
The sources indicate that Bezos explicitly blocked the editorial board from endorsing Kamala Harris. And this was immediately met with just fierce internal and external condemnation.
The former editor, Marty Baron, called the decision a display of disturbing spinelessness.
And the fallout was dramatic and immediate.
It wasn't just abstract criticism either. It resulted in a tangible loss of talent and audience.
That's right. In the immediate wake of that non-endorsement decision, several high-profile columnists and board members resigned, people like Robert Kagan and Michelle Norris.
And the subscribers.
More dramatically, the paper experienced a mass wave of subscription cancellations. Sources indicate that over 250,000 subscribers, roughly 10% of their total, canceled.
A 10% drop. And this move toward controlling the editorial message only deepened in early 2025.
The next major ideological shoe dropped in February 2025. Bezos announced a radical new policy for the opinion section.
He stated it would only give voice to opinions supporting personal liberties and free markets.
Basically, divergent opinions, especially those seen as critical of capital or free enterprise, would be actively suppressed.
That is a dramatic ideological transformation of a historic newspaper's entire mission statement.
It was decisive. The opinion editor, David Shipley, immediately resigned after trying and failing to persuade Bezos to reverse the decision.
And this led to another wave of cancellations.
A smaller but still significant wave, over 75,000 in just 2 days. It paints this stark picture of an owner willing to sacrifice revenue and editorial independence to enforce a specific ideological framework.
It connects perfectly back to that desire to control core infrastructure. If AWS controls the data infrastructure, the Washington Post seems to be about controlling the informational infrastructure.
And this control extends to the fundamental limits of the human body itself.
Which brings us to Altos Labs. If the regret-minimization framework leads you to fear stagnation, then biological stasis aging is the ultimate regret to minimize.
Exactly. Altos Labs, which he co-founded in September 2021 with Yuri Milner, is squarely focused on longevity.
It launched with an astonishing $3 billion in capital.
That amount of money right out of the gate demonstrates the seriousness of the intent. They recruited Nobel laureate Shinya Yamanaka, the inventor of cellular reprogramming, to lead the scientific charge.
And the goal?
To develop therapeutics using cellular reprogramming to reverse or dramatically slow the aging process. It is a direct, massive, well-capitalized assault on the fundamental biological limitations of life.
And finally, connecting that AI focus back to his physical interests, we have Project Prometheus.
Project Prometheus, co-founded in November 2025, takes that 95% AI focus he declared and applies it directly to the physical world. It's focused on using artificial intelligence in the engineering, design, and manufacturing of complex physical goods.
Specifically computers, spacecraft,
which links back to Blue Origin,
and automobiles. This is about building the AI that builds the world. It's about ensuring control over the foundational tools of future industry. The evolution of Bezos' public persona is a narrative arc in itself. The sources really paint a picture of a relentless transformation that mirrors the growth and scope of Amazon.
Oh, for sure. In the 90s and early 2000s, he was defined by that image of the geeky, quantitative, data-driven founder. And crucially, he was famously parsimonious.
very reluctant to spend money outside of the business.
Right. He was known for being relentless and highly specific in his communication.
But then, in the mid-2010s, this very visible transformation began, which coincided with Amazon's emergence as a dominant global force.
It was a very public physical and sartorial shift. Tailored clothing, weight training, a highly regimented diet. The physical hardening was instantly compared by the media to the hardening and global scale of Amazon itself.
He evolved from the nerdy pioneer into what is now frequently parodied as the enterprising supervillain.
The brilliant but mysterious and cold-blooded corporate titan.
And that cold-blooded reputation, it stems from his demanding, systems-driven leadership style. So let's break down his most famous principles, starting with the philosophical one, day one.
The Day One philosophy is a management tool that's designed to fight organizational entropy. The core idea is that it is always day one at Amazon.
To avoid what he calls the corporate diseases.
Complacency, stasis, irrelevance, decline, and ultimately death. It forces a constant entrepreneurial paranoia and a relentless focus on the customer.
And this philosophy is enforced through some highly specific, almost legendary tactical rules for management.
We have three major rules that really define how Amazon executives operate. First, the two-pizza rule.
Meetings must be small enough that 2 pizzas can feed everyone in the room.
It's a simple way to fight bureaucratic bloat. Second, the requirement that high-level employees present information using 6-page narrative memos instead of PowerPoint slides.
Which forces detailed, clear narrative thinking rather than just relying on bullet points.
Exactly. And the third and most feared tool is his personal email address.
He famously maintains the public email jeff@amazon.com for customer feedback.
Right. And while he doesn't reply to the customers himself, he forwards selected complaints to the relevant executives with a single, powerful symbol in the subject line.
A question mark.
Just a question mark. That symbol is legendary within Amazon. They say it strikes fear into managers and triggers immediate defensive action and investigation. It's the ultimate expression of his claimed customer focus.
He also rejects the whole concept of work-life balance.
He prefers the term work-life harmony. He believes that work and home life are interconnected, that they calibrate each other.
Which is another way of saying that the relentless focus required for day one is not something you can just switch off at 5 p.m.
Not at all. But this intensity, while driving unprecedented success, has earned him some serious public and internal criticism regarding the human cost of that efficiency.
That criticism is persistent, and it's well documented.
In 2014, the International Trade Union Confederation named him the world's worst boss. More recently, Amazon has scored relatively low on key ESG metrics.
ESG being environment, social, and governance.
And they've been flagged for highly documented concerns related to working conditions, aggressive anti-union tactics, and data privacy.
What exactly does a low ESG score mean in Amazon's context? I mean, for you, the listener.
Well, ESG is a measure that investors use to gauge a company's social responsibility.
Yeah.
So Amazon's low as the social score is directly linked to the operational reality of their warehouses.
High injury rates, stringent performance metrics for workers.
And documented efforts to discourage union organization. It highlights this huge paradox. The macro vision for humanity's future seems to clash very sharply with the operational reality for the company's current workforce.
Okay, let's turn to his most fluid and high-stakes transformation, his political alignment, specifically the shift concerning Donald Trump.
Historically, their relationship was highly contentious. Trump frequently attacked Bezos, accusing him of tax avoidance, suggesting he used the Washington Post as a political weapon.
And Bezos, meanwhile, was generally bipartisan, but notably supported same-sex marriage with a large donation in 2012.
But that dynamic changed decisively around the 2024 election. And this is the ultimate expression of that pragmatic, business-first pivot.
The shift was striking in its speed and visibility.
It was. Axios reported a private phone conversation between Bezos and then-candidate Trump in July 2024. Then, following Trump's victory, Bezos publicly congratulated him on his extraordinary political comeback.
And Amazon quickly followed up with a $1 million donation to the inauguration.
This growing alignment, which includes post-election dinners at Mar-a-Lago, suggests a pretty clear strategic goal.
What's the interpretation there?
The one offered by the Financial Times is that Bezos is strategically seeking to further his business interests, whether it's securing major government contracts like the lucrative GDI Cloud project or seeking favorable regulatory environments.
So it's a purely calculated move to minimize political regret.
That's the argument. Finally, we have to revisit that international controversy tied to his media ownership. The Saudi hacking claim from 2018.
This incident really highlighted the extreme risks that come with owning a globally critical news organization.
It did. The claim involved the alleged hacking of his personal phone using a malicious file sent via WhatsApp from the Saudi Crown Prince's personal account.
And what was the motivation linked to this alleged hack?
Well, Bezos' own security consultant explicitly linked it to the Washington Post's ongoing critical coverage of the murder of journalist Jamal Khashoggi, who was a Post columnist.
Right.
The forensic analysis concluded it was highly probable the hack occurred after Khashoggi wrote critically about the Crown Prince. While Saudi Arabia has vehemently denied the claim, the episode just demonstrates how his media ownership injects him directly into these high-stakes international geopolitical conflicts.
We've tracked his journey and his principles, but the sheer scale of his wealth is a defining feature of modern capitalism, and it saw incredible volatility early on.
The volatility is instructive, especially when you think about the dot-com crash. He became a millionaire with the 1997 IPO and was on the Forbes list in 1999 at $10 billion.
But the crash delivered a harsh lesson.
A huge one. His wealth plummeted by a staggering 66.6%, hitting a low of $1.5 billion in 2002. It's a reminder that even the biggest names in tech were almost wiped out.
But the invention of AWS propelled the recovery and then, that exponential growth.
Once AWS stabilized the company, the growth was unprecedented. He became the first registered semi-billionaire in March 2018, crossing the $112 billion mark.
And by July of that year, he was designated the wealthiest person in modern history.
In nominal terms, yes, after surpassing $150 billion. It's worth noting that Bill Gates, adjusted for inflation, briefly held a higher real net worth previously.
And the major public reduction of his wealth then occurred in 2019 with his divorce from Mackenzie Scott.
A massive wealth transfer. She received 25% of their Amazon stock, valued at approximately $36 billion, making her one of the world's richest women overnight.
But critically for Bezos is continued control.
He retained full voting control over those shares, as well as full ownership of Blue Origin and the Washington Post.
And his assets now reflect a very visible global display of wealth, especially his real estate portfolio.
The real estate is geographically strategic and just represents staggering value. He holds 3 adjoining apartments in Manhattan, including an $80 million penthouse he bought in 2019.
And in Los Angeles.
He bought the Warner estate for a record $165 million in 2020. And more recently, in 2022, he bought a remote 14-acre estate in Maui for $78 million. It signals both luxury and a move toward increased privacy and security.
And, of course, the ultimate status symbol of modern wealth, the super yacht.
The Y-721, estimated to cost over $500 million. It's not just a boat. It's a statement of wealth measured not just in billions, but in controlling these highly visible, unique logistical assets on a global scale.
For years, however, he faced a lot of criticism for his reluctance to engage in philanthropy at the scale of his peers. He hadn't signed the Giving Pledge as of 2018.
Right, and this led to a very public and massive scaling up of his giving. Starting around 2017, he really needed to respond to that critique and create philanthropic vehicles that mirrored the scale of his business ambitions.
And that coalesced into the Day One Fund, established in 2018.
A $2 billion commitment targeting 2 highly specific areas.
The first is the Day One Families Fund.
Right, that's focused on addressing homelessness by funding night shelters and daycare centers for homeless families. It awarded $123 million in 2022 alone.
And the second is the Day One Academies Fund,
which establishes nonprofit, tuition-free preschools for low-income communities, often operating under that Montessori model he experienced as a child.
Then came the largest commitment of all, the Bezos Earth Fund in 2020.
And this is directly tied to his philosophical drive to preserve Earth. He pledged $10 billion to combat climate change.
A huge number.
He announced initial grants totaling nearly $800 million to major organizations like the Environmental Defense Fund and the World Wildlife Fund. Then in 2021, he pledged another $2 billion toward restructuring food systems and nature conservation. It's immense, and it's meant to balance the criticism of Amazon's operational carbon footprint with this macro commitment to global climate efforts.
And finally, there's the highly personal touch of the Courage and Civility Award.
Announced in 2021, this award gives $100 million each to recipients chosen by Bezos. People like Chef Jose Andres, Van Jones, Dolly Parton.
And the key feature of this award is the lack of strings attached.
Exactly. The recipients can use the capital instantly and freely to deploy rapid, large-scale charitable efforts. It really reflects his bias toward efficient, unencumbered action. Hashtag tag outro.
So we've completed a massive deep dive into a figure who is fundamentally reshaping not just commerce, but the informational, biological, and spatial landscape of the future.
We've tracked him from the early influence of his grandfather, the AEC director, and that pragmatic pivot he made at Princeton.
Through the near-death experience of Amazon and the strategic genius of building AWS.
His entire career is really defined by this dual pursuit of hyper-efficiency on one hand and grand existential vision on the other. He's the meticulous quantitative builder who maximizes market efficiency while simultaneously dedicating billions to solving problems like climate change and human aging.
And the recent controversies at the Washington Post, it really can't be understated. The dramatic exodus of editorial staff and those massive subscription cancellations that followed his ideological mandate.
To promote only personal liberties and free markets opinions.
It shows the immediate, tangible power he wields over the informational infrastructure.
And that political pivot toward Donald Trump further reinforces the interpretation that his decisions are ultimately driven by a strategic, quantitative calculation. It's about minimizing political and regulatory regret to secure Amazon's long-term business interests in a complex global market.
So what does this all mean for you, the learner, listening to this? We've seen how Bezos' life was fundamentally driven by his regret-minimization framework, shifting his focus from the regret of missing the internet boom to funding efforts that might help humanity avoid future environmental and biological regret.
But look at his current focus. He's funding the AI that builds the future physical world through Project Prometheus,
while simultaneously dictating the narrative of personal liberty and free markets at the Washington Post.
So is this just a bid for efficiency? Or is this strategy controlling both the mechanism of future production and the narrative of future ideology? Is this an attempt to control the fundamental rules of the next century?
That is the essential question. It raises the issue of whether the pursuit of minimizing one man's regret inevitably leads to maximizing control over the world's most critical technological and informational systems.
And that's a challenging paradox for all of us to consider.
Fascinating stuff. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We'll be back soon with another stack of sources to unpack for you.